Alright. I don't suffer because of autism, but I do suffer because of how you treat me. This was said by Tyler Durkin. As an autistic person, I understand what he's trying to say. A lot of the suffering, in my experience from autism, is from people misunderstanding what autism is and how it affects an autistic person. And it's important to know how what autism is and how it affects people. So this is according to the CD, the Center of Disease and Control. 1 in 54 children are autistic. In this speech, I hope to give you a better understanding of what autism is, the symptoms of autism, and why is it called a spectrum. First, let's look at a definition of autism. According to the Mental Health Weekly Digest, autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by challenges in social, communication and interactions, and restricted or repetitive behaviors, activities, or interests. It's basically a disorder that affects the way our brains develop and how it functions and processes information. Now we will look at some symptoms of autism. First, it's important to see how medical professionals diagnose autism. They look at the Diagnosis and Statistic Manual for Mental Disorders, and they base the criteria. There's five criteria that are found in there that they use to diagnose, and the 5 criteria are social, communication, and interaction defects, repetitive or restrictive activities, behaviors, or interests. 3, the symptoms onset in early childhood. You may get diagnosed later in life, but the symptoms were present since your childhood. 4, the symptoms interferes significantly with in terms of your academic, professional, or social functioning. And 5, they cannot be explained by another disorder. And another way to look at it is by looking at it in this breakup way. Pragmatic language, which is about how autistic people can read body language, can they keep a to and from conversation, how literally they take things, like how well they can understand sarcasm, because some autistic people have a hard time understanding sarcasm. Social awareness is how well they understand social cues, social etiquettes, and like really being able to understand the unwritten social rules that are made in society. Then monotopic mindset, which is related to this thing called a special interest. Autistic person has usually has like a certain topic or something that they're very obsessed with, and that's the thing that they like to think about, talk about, do anything with. Like in my case, I'm really into Star Wars. Like in terms of like when I have like freedom to choose a project in terms of art, I usually like to draw stuff related to Star Wars, like Han Solo or the Millennium Falcon, as an example. And also the monotypic mindset relates to how autistic people have set routines that they like to follow. If it gets disrupted, they can have a meltdown and freak out and have a hard time moving on with what's going on. And then information processing is how well they process the information given to them. Like for me, I sometimes struggle when I'm given verbal instructions compared to written instructions. It's sometimes hard to like process what someone's saying and follow along. That sometimes I need it to be repeated. And then there's sensory processing, which is how they take in sensory input from involving any of the 5 senses. Like in my case, I have a hard time with a lot of loud noises, in particular music. That sometimes when I'm like overwhelmed with it, it feels like tiny little hammers banging in my head. It's not a fun experience. And some other autistic people have a hard time with touch. That sometimes it feels like when someone touches them, it feels like pure fire to them. Those are just some examples. And then repetitive behaviors. This is related to stimming, which is usually something to do for self-smoothing. Non-autistic people also do this in terms of like if they have nervous tics. But for autistic people, as they do it like in a more continuous way and might not understand like you say they're drumming their fingers and might not recognize the social cues of someone being annoyed by it. There's also sometimes it could be harmful in terms of like when they're really upset, they might end up banging their head continuously on a wall, which is not a great way to deal with things, but it does happen. But they also could do it when they're excited, like when they get excited, they start flapping their hands or on spinning around in circles, stuff like that. And then there's neuromotor differences where it's like how well they control their body movement. Like some autistic people have a hard time doing any sort of physical activities, like in sports and being able to participate, or like sometimes they will be walking and they run into walls and stuff. Now that we know some symptoms of autism, let's look at why is it considered a spectrum. First, one way to look at a spectrum is using these things called functioning labels, which it looks more like kind of like a number line, which on one end there's high functioning, on the other end is low functioning. When someone sees someone is considered high functioning and they seem as being less autistic or more mild autism, and it doesn't affect them as much. And if someone's seen as low functioning, it could be seen as more autistic and have severe autism, and it's more difficult to function. But this way of viewing it can be very harmful because if someone's seen as high functioning, they might not get their struggles and the help they need in their struggles. It might be dismissed and not seen as well. While if someone's seen as low functioning, people might dismiss their strengths and capabilities and not let them be as independent as they can be by seeing them all like, oh, you can't do that sort of thing. This is why we view it. This is why there's another way to view it, is more in terms of like a spectrum, in terms of like a color wheel. This is shown in a comic by Rebecca Bergson, where she explains understanding autism as a spectrum, where she uses this image where you look at it kind of like a color wheel, where there's the symptoms are each different color, and like each autistic person could be any variation of the symptoms. Like say someone is very nonverbal and they can't speak, but they don't have as much sensory issues, so they could process the sensory information pretty good, and they're semi-okay with their motor skills, and then they might also struggle with other things. Well, someone else, on the other hand, can be very good at talking and communicating, but they might also struggle in terms of how much it could take in sensory information. In conclusion, I think it's important to understand autism and what it is and how it affects autistic people. It will make the world better for autistic people if the other people can understand what it is. And I think the most important thing to remember is that each autistic person is different and experience the symptoms differently. Like Dr. Stephen Shore said, if you met one autistic person, you only met one autistic person.